So what's going on?
Trying to figure out what the weather's going to be. So I kind of wanted to do another outside recording today, but last time I got sunburned and my computer started overheating, so I need to work on my setup. But the weather's been weird. Yesterday, it was chilly in the valley, but we had some considerable snow in the
Mhm.
mountains. Last day of May. It's a little crazy. So trying to figure out if it's spring or what's happening here.
Yeah, we didn't have much of a spring. It went from winter to less winterish rainy weather to
Mm,
now like 90 some degrees and humidity.
oof. I'm not a
But
fan.
we
I, I don't know. I don't know if the East Coast and it is. I mean, and maybe it's just psychological. I did not enjoy like the maybe not northeast, but more central southeast coast humidity. I found completely unbearable, but the Southern California humidity I found incredibly intoxicating. I really
Mhm.
enjoyed it. So I don't know. I don't know what the difference is between the two.
I mean, I've only been out to California a couple times, but I think I kind of get the idea. Like, yeah, the humidity here, like when there's like not a cloud in the sky and it's humid, it's brutal.
Mm, yeah, it's probably the heat, right? Because when I'm talking humidity in California, it was like 68,
Oh
70
yeah, yeah.
degrees and
Well, it's the
humid.
combination of the two.
Yeah,
It's the combination of the
it's
heat
the
and humidity.
98 degrees and 80% humidity that's like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is not going to work.
Yeah. So we joined the local swim club for this year and we signed the little guy up for swim lessons. So so we got that going on. So yeah, looking forward to spending time at the pool.
Awesome. You'll have to take your iPad set up and
I will.
do some brainstorming and documenting.
Yeah, no, like I plan on it Friday afternoons. Go over, take the iPad and be there doing some work from right next to the pool.
Nice. Sounds like a good summer.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
So so as far as our actual topic for today, I want to start to wrap up the topic we've had the past few weeks around data activation. So, in previous episodes, we've defined what it means to activate data. What are some of the key things to have in place for a successful foundation? But today, I want to look at the other side of that. Or what are some of the common pitfalls? What
Mm,
have you seen clients
so many.
do, like mistakes make, and like what kind of issues have you seen with clients when they've tried to jump onto the data activation train?
Excuse me. Yeah, so many. I'm trying to figure out where to. I'm going to start with something recent. And I'm going to use a personal story to talk about that has nothing to do with data analytics. Well, it has nothing to do with kind of the analytics that we do. But I think really helps to illustrate a point, especially when it comes to one of the major challenges that I've seen in business when it comes to activating the data, but one that I don't know that we have a good solution for. At least it's something that we're not actively talking about. So here's the personal story first to lead into that. Recently, my mom and sister, and I don't know how scientific these things are and how the validity of them, but my mom and sister did their DNA profile analysis through like ancestry or one
Like
of
a
these.
23andMe kind of thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and both of theirs came back predictably very similar. However, the origins came back in misalignment with the narrative that we've long told ourselves. Um,
For both of them?
for
Or
both
one?
of them. No, both
Oh,
of
okay.
them.
Okay. So it
Yeah.
wasn't like a flaw in just one.
Yeah, no, they both were again very similar in matching, but the family origins were not exactly aligned with the narrative that we had told ourselves as a family, which then
Mhm.
kind of informed like kind of the culture and things that we celebrated and food that we ate. And so it was very eye opening, and it wasn't like something drastic. It wasn't like we thought we were of Scottish origin and it came back that we were of Japanese origin. I mean, nothing like that. But we had long told ourselves, and there's kind of this narrative within the family that we have Northern Italian roots.
Hmm.
And that really informed a lot of our views on how we viewed the world and things. The DNA profile came back and said actually there's very little Northern Italian um, influence in your DNA profile, and in fact it's almost exclusively Sicilian.
Interesting.
um,
Okay.
yeah, which was kind of, and sure, people migrate and move from one part of the country to another, but it was a fairly stark contrast to what we had long believed. And again, I don't know how valid these are, but it was, similar between my mom and my sister. So I got thinking about it. I'm like, there's an interesting parallel here to business as we collect the data, as we collect the DNA and we do our analysis. What happens when we start to activate that data and we start seeing something in the data that is in direct contrast to the narratives that we've told in the business for so long that have become part of our lore? And that has become, I think, a major challenge that we've seen in companies as we start to activate data. And we hear this story, we hear what they're asking. We want to be data informed, we want to use data to better understand our consumer. And I remember back very, very early on to a large retailer that we worked with that actually had defined their personas and hung up pictures or paintings in the offices of their persona customers. This is homemaker, Sue or something, and she likes to do X, Y, and Z. And we did a very thorough investigation analysis and came back and said, yeah, but actually there's these other personas that we don't see anywhere on your in your hallways that seems to be a very strong buyer. And they rejected it, and they're like, no, 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 like the story we've told ourselves is like this is our buyers, like. And so that's, to answer your question, it's one of the major challenges that we've seen is that when we start to activate the data and that data tells a different story than we've told for the past decade of who we are, what do we do? And oftentimes we've seen it create a lot of angst where we say, wait a minute, our whole model, everything we do is wrapped around this story that now you're saying may not be complete or maybe slightly different. I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've seen that multiple times too. Like I immediately think of a fashion retailer I worked with, God, 10 years ago or so. And like their advertising reflected who they saw their persona to, who they were marketing to. This is who this is our customer. And then as we started to look at the data, I'm like, no, I'm seeing this. And we're like, well, we kind of know, but this is who we want to think our customer
Right.
is.
Right. Yeah, and again, going back to your question, like what are the major pitfalls? I mean, that is a huge, huge pitfall because when that doesn't align with the narrative and the stories that we've told ourselves, what do we do with that information? And oftentimes we reject it. And if we don't just outright reject it, what does it do? Well, it causes us, and oftentimes it's the data that bears the brunt of this attack, we lose confidence in because it doesn't align with the way that we thought about things. And so, we could have just spent $500,000, $1 million to stand up an analytics practice. We're now ready to activate the data. The data tells a slightly different story. And now all of a sudden that entire investment is in question because we're like, I don't know if the implementation is right. And sure, by all means, we need to question it. We need to test, like, is it right? Ask more questions. But it's a major risk factor when those stories don't align when we start to activate the data. Another major pitfall that we see in so many organizations is the desire, well, not the desire to underdeliver, but oftentimes the desire to overdeliver comes with overpromising, comes with underdelivering. And what I mean by that is that, once you start to collect this data, it's really difficult to slow down and say we need to take a, maybe pun intended, measured approach here to how we think about our analytics practice. And what ends up happening is you have the proverbial kid in a giant candy factory that says, think about, Willy Wonka when they first go into the chocolate room and was it Augustus that dives into the chocolate river?
Hmm.
That's kind of what's happening in these companies. They get led into this amazing room where everything's edible, and they can't contain themselves. They're like stuffing their face with food and trying to, and that's what happens in these organizations is they're unable to think about a way to consume all of this amazingness in a sustainable way. And what ends up happening is these organizations, in an attempt to activate the data, go from just trying to get basic dashboarding. So directionally, are we gonna, is the car going in the right direction? To instantly going from that to, well, we need to buy all this audience data and CDPs and complex models and then activate this. I'm like, guys, like you literally just barely learned how to crawl. Like, let's slow it down a little bit. But again, it's this like over exuberance of a child. Think of your analogy, Christmas Day, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where they simply are unable to control their urge and emotions to have all the things right now. And most of the times, 99 times out of 100, that ends in very negative experiences.
Yeah, like we're actually working with a client right now, on that and trying to help temper expectations. We found some interesting tidbits, but we also found some serious flaws in just the data alone. So there's a balancing act there of the what we can't learn from the data and what we are able to learn. But yeah, like really making sure that we're double checking what we've learned, because they definitely flies in the face of what they've, I'm going to continue to use, your wording of, the stories they've told themselves internally, what they've told themselves as far as measures of success, measures of engagement, why people come and use their platform, all of those kinds of things. So, it's definitely, because then you quickly get involved in the politics of it. You definitely get involved in corporate politics when you start to tell a different story than what people have been, come to be used to.
Yeah, and that's where I think having incredibly strong leadership becomes very, very important. Because if not, then you create all of this potential infighting and almost like civil war battles between organizations. And having strong executive leadership for your data function is so critically important. I think I shared on a previous podcast the story of when I was working client side, and I was reporting up through the marketing organization. And I still remember it very clearly to this day, where I presented insights from a fairly large marketing campaign that we ran that didn't align with the narrative that the marketing team was sharing with our C-suite.
Mm-hmm.
And that did not go over well. My boss and my boss's boss were incredibly unhappy with me
Mm-hmm.
for doing that, because my story that, or my insight that I was presenting, was not in alignment with the narrative that they were crafting. And so if we don't have the right structure in place, if we don't have the right um, kind of leadership in place to position this as something scientific and independent that we're doing, then what we become, or the risk that we may become, is a propaganda organization. And that, I think, is a very scary thing to do. And if I remember back, man, many years ago, the DAA came out with this, what was it called, the code of ethics for analysts, where this kind of independent scientific state is our view, and if we're using data in an unethical way, if we're using it for propaganda, we're violating our ethics and our oath as analysts. But man, when you don't have that leadership in place to set that expectation, it very easily goes down that slippery slope of becoming an organization, once you start activating the data, to be one that is science based and reason based, and we're doing it to learn. That may be the goal, but you very quickly fall down this hill where all of a sudden you now are a propaganda organization to support marketing, to support whatever organization you're rolling up through, and you're changing the narrative, the numbers, the way you view things, in order to align with that story that we're telling. And that's dangerous, I think.
Yeah. Do you remember that project years ago where we found a major data collection issue, worked with the client to fix it, and upon fixing it, the numbers got worse. So they were reporting bad numbers that showed certain things in a positive light. And upon fixing it, and the numbers were more accurate, things weren't as positive, and they came back and asked us to re-break it.
Do I remember that?
Hold on, I'll in the private chat.
Okay.
I'm not gonna mention it here.
Okay. Oh yes. Oh yes.
You remember that one now?
I
They
remember
asked
that
us to
one.
re-break things.
Yeah. Hey guys, like this implementation that you set up that was like incredibly clean and very good data. Yeah, it doesn't align with our forecasts and numbers that we've published the last 2 years. Can you break the implementation so things align again?
Mm-hmm.
What? Oh yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
for reminding me of that. I had totally forgotten about that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't, and I don't think I will. Like that is like one of those things, like one of those projects that's just always going to stick with me
Mm-hmm.
because it was just it's just a reaffirmation that there are people out there that aren't don't want to be honest. Like they the minute something doesn't go their way, like, oh, no, what you say is correct has to be wrong.
There's actually a spectrum on this, which I think is worth talking about as we're talking about data activation. On the extreme unethical things we shouldn't be doing there's that example that you shared in private chat where it was by the way, can you break things so our numbers align with this worldview that we have, which we know are wrong, but we have to have it. That, that's one problem. There's another problem on the other side of that spectrum, and we've worked with some very sick companies to help cure them of this, where their aim wasn't to be unethical or misrepresent, but things had been broken for so long that it became comfortable for them to have things broken. And when we come in and start to clean things up, it creates a lot of anxiety and fear. And then they start saying, wait a minute, this isn't right. We're like, no, this is right. It was wrong before. Yeah, and I mean, we understand that, but like we're so used to that. Can you alter the data in such a way that it aligns with that just because we're comfortable with it? And again, I don't think they're coming at it on that extreme from a ethics perspective. It's just they're so comfortable with things being broken that it's hard to go back to the way things are. I imagine there's probably parallels with like injuries or something. Like, maybe if you've suffered like a knee injury or something and you develop a certain way of walking and then you get it fixed, but you can't, that's probably why you have physical therapy, right? To like train those bad habits out that you had, that you dealt with that injury. It's like, okay, well, we fixed it. You had surgery and you're all better now. Why are you still doing that way? I don't know. Like, I'm just comfortable doing that.
That was my dad. So my
Mm.
dad is like as like in his early 20s playing sports, blew out one of his knees. And like this is going back to the 70s. And the default surgery was to go in and remove the damaged cartilage, not fix
Mm-hmm.
it, remove it. So by the time he was in his late 30s, early 40s, his left knee was just bone on bone.
Ooh.
So when I was like 12, he had a partial knee replacement there to fix it. But again, like that has a usable life. And he, like that started to wear down, and he was just trying to get to retirement to have a full double replacement because he didn't want to be working after having that, like because he didn't want to have it done and then wear it down working because he was standing all day. So he let his left knee that had the partial replacement get so bad that he was compensating with his right knee
Mm.
at over favoring that, and then wore that one down.
Yeah.
So then when he did, that was part of the physical therapy after he had both knees replaced, was to stop walking with that limp or stop favoring the right leg. He basically had to relearn how to walk.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a strong example, and sorry you had to go through that, of what we see in these businesses, that they've
Mhm.
overcompensated with their other leg again, that it becomes so comfortable for them that it may feel comfortable, but what they don't realize is they're actually doing damage to the healthy parts of the organization. And so, I think it's really important as we start to activate data to think about these pitfalls, because if we don't, it's very easy to fall into them.
Mhm.
It shouldn't be a shock that these things happen in so many organizations. The fact that they're so predictable and happening tells us that these things are very common. And if we're not thinking about it, if we're not developing a plan and a strategy for how to address it, then we're not special. We're not going to avoid it just because we're special. Um, we're going to probably fall into some of these traps because so many organizations do. So, again, thinking about these things, recognizing that they happen, and being very deliberate in putting a plan in place to address them, uh, won't give you an insurance policy that you won't fall into any traps, but you're going to be in a much better position than otherwise. Another thing that I think is important to call out from a data activation trap perspective is one of resourcing. And what I mean by that is that um, once you show new capabilities or new insights or learnings to the organization that they've never had before, and you've done it in a way that is right, and it excites people, what tends to happen? That excitement builds on itself, and now all of a sudden your organization is completely overloaded with requests for more and more data activation. And so if you're not prepared to put some kind of model in place to govern how that works, we've seen it happen. If you And not to put you on the spot, but if you are not deliberate in designing how your analytics team operates, what would you say is the de facto organic way of responding to requests if you haven't put a strategy in place?
Um, I mean, the first one that I've seen happen a lot is people don't think. They just they just go in and just build something. So they
Yeah.
don't they just build something and send it out to say they got the request out. They don't actually think through what they're building, nor do they have anybody review it with them to say, like, is this accurate? Poke holes in this for me. They just send out data, and there's also no commentary involved, so it leaves it wide open for interpretation.
I mean, I think that's spot on. And the reason why that is happening is because when we don't have a strategy for how we're going to activate data, and then we become overrun with requests, our de facto state is to be responsive, to be a first responder, to be the emergency room tech. It's the last in first out mentality. And while that may work when you're treating a trauma or an acute situation, because it's like, look, we can't focus on the bigger picture. We literally have to stop this person from bleeding all their blood out. So that is our A1 priority. That makes sense in that situation. But we aren't working in emergency rooms. We're not working at natural disasters. We're working within a business where we have time to step back and be more analytical and measured in our approach for how we come at these things. And so one of the traps is to become that first responder, that always on responding to emergencies. It's a recipe for burnout. It's a recipe for providing poor insights. And to your point, it's not sustainable. And the reason it's not sustainable, because in emergency, as I mentioned, you have to block out everything else and focus on the most critical task. What that means is you're saying there are other things that are bad that are happening, but because this one thing is life or death, we have to ignore them. We're not dealing with life and death stuff here. So we need to take the bigger picture in play and not just rush to put something in place to address this request, but how does this fit in with the larger ecosystem? How does this fit in with the larger data that we have in place? Is the solution we're putting in place, whether it's an analysis or a dashboard or what have you, is it sustainable, or are we building some little one-off thing that we're adding to the Jenga pile? We should take a much more slowed, measured approach to how we're thinking about this from a resourcing and a governance perspective, because if we don't, The trap of data activation is we turn into the emergency room.
Yeah.
We're not emergency room technicians, and we're all going to fail in that model.
Yeah. I'm laughing because when you mentioned the Jenga pile, I could think of this meme. I forget who posted it, so I apologize if to whomever it was, but it was something along the lines of, someone deleted a load bearing Excel spreadsheet today. How's your Friday going? And it gives you this great visual.
Yeah.
Because we've all been there. Someone goes in and deletes something that they think is not of value, and it is like this nexus for like a million other different things. So all of a sudden, all these other things start to fail.
It's exactly right. And I covered last week for a client that was out on vacation, and I was meeting with one of their agencies, and they had a request to do something, and I said, you know, it may feel like the immediate next step is to jump in and do this right now. And it may sound simple, but I know from experience that there's a lot of dependencies and things connected with this one thing you want me to do. I'm going to wait 3 days until, the client comes back in the office and strategize with them, because I can foresee pulling out that one load bearing piece here and everything crumbling. And this is not that time sensitive. We don't need to be the hero all the time. And in fact, sometimes and often I would say being the hero is being, again, more measured and taking a step back and saying, I don't need to put on the cape and go put out this fire or solve this crime right now. The more measured approach really is the hero that businesses need. Because right now they have a bunch of firefighters, and yeah, we need firefighters, but we're not fighting fires in this role.
Mm.
And so the hero really is the one in these organizations that can take a step back and say, I'm going to be a little bit more measured. I'm going to think a little bit broader, more long-term, more sustainable before I come back with a solution. Maybe there are times where it really is incredibly time sensitive. Maybe there are times where it really is really very critical that we drop everything and do it right now, and, collateral damage be damned. But so very, very rare. So very rare. And I like to think that that's the role that hopefully we're playing for our partners. And hopefully we're helping train and mentor those that we're working with, that this really is a better way of working. If nothing else, then for the long-term health and sustainability of the employee. Because people working in this kind of mentality, it's absolutely a recipe for burnout. So if nothing else, be selfish, that for your long-term benefit, this isn't a good way to work. But a positive for your business is going to be, it's also going to create a more sustainable, valuable data activation practice as well. So it really is that proverbial win-win.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So I think those are my major points. If I had to go, I'm not going to rank them, but just to go back and highlight them. What happens when the narrative, or what happens when the data starts showing a different narrative than what the story we've told ourselves? What are we going to do? We should be prepared to be able to answer that and address the challenges that brings up. We talked about this last point of sustainability and getting out of this first responder firefighter mentality that does not put us in a good position to build analytics organizations that are activating data in a healthy, sustainable way. We talked about this kind of kid in the candy store mentality, where once you start showing that there's all this goodness to be had, how do you control yourself and not overconsume and binge? Again, we need to be thinking long term. How do we sustain this? And if we just try to just gobble it all up right now, we're going to be sick and bloated, and we're not going to want to go back to that anytime soon. So, there's some very, very real challenges here. And I think really, part of the key takeaway here is in being deliberate. I mean, it's something that we've been doing. I hate the term. We're going to have to come up with another term, and we often mock the corporatisms internally. But the term of eat your own dog food, the things that we're advising companies to do, I mean, we're doing, right? It's not like we're just telling people how to do it. the things that we're advising companies to do, we're doing as we're thinking about strategically how we build and run 33 sticks. So all of these things aren't like best practices or book knowledge. These are things that we're absolutely doing in our own business to make our own business operate better, and being deliberate, being focused on the long term, thinking about sustainable practices are core tenets to how we're building the business. And it only makes sense that those inform how we think about and provide services to our clients. And whether you're a client of ours or not, these are things that we absolutely believe without a doubt will make your organization, your employees happier and more successful. And again, it comes down to being deliberate and thinking about sustainability and long-term results over being reactionary and everything's about today. That model simply is unsustainable
Hmm.
over a long-term period.
Yeah. So if there was one concrete thing someone could do today, so you were talking about like being deliberate, being intentional, um, that kind of mindset, and not being the firefighter.
Yeah.
If someone is finding that they are not in that state of mind, or they're not in the deliberate state of mind, they're in that firefighter emergency response state of mind, what's one thing someone could do today to start to shift that mindset?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to recognize it. So if you're recognizing it and you're kind of taking note of that is how you're operating, the very first thing that you should do is start asking the question of how much autonomy, how much authority do I have to change that landscape? Because if you're not in a position to influence that or work with a boss or an executive to help influence that, I think it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to affect any kind of change. And the fact that you're recognizing it and wanting to change is going to end up being a exercise in frustration and futility, because you know what you want to do, but you're unable to get it done within your organization. So I think that's the first thing. Recognize that it's an issue, recognize that it's something that you want to change, and then be truthful in answering the question, is this something within my role, within my organization, within my management structure that I have the trust, autonomy, and authority to influence? If the answer is no, I would say go get another job. If the answer is yes, then that should be one of your top priorities starting today. Is one, how do we stop the bleeding?
Yeah.
How do we, we're in that firefighter emergency room scenario. How do we stop the bleeding and put an end to this? And then how do we transition the business, both from a tactical and from a strategic positioning perspective, to see us not as first responders, but as strategic experts and guides, and be willing for us to set the timeline and agenda that we know has everyone's best interest in mind. And while you may not see a flurry of activity and may not have your request turned around every 24 hours, you are going to be getting a fundamentally better, more informed, more valuable product from our team than otherwise. Make that your priority to happen. But again, ask yourself the question. If you can't influence it, and I don't want to be flippant in saying it, but really, you should go find another job.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on. And honestly, I've got no follow up to that, so I'm just going to let that one
I think
sit.
I think a 30-minute runtime is maybe a good
Yeah,
kind of turned around with it. It kind of felt like we reached a natural progression around that 30-minute mark.
yeah, yeah. I think so. So, I don't want to take away anything from that. So, let's go ahead and wrap up here for this week.
Sounds
It's
good.
been a great chat, and
Yep.
and the one thing as we've been talking, the one theme I've noticed when we've talked about data activation, I bet people were waiting for is like, what tools should I use? What things should I have my developers do? What should I talk to my architects about? We didn't touch on any of that.
No,
All of that, it's corporate mindset, individual mindset, um, approach, has nothing to do with the tools.
couldn't agree more.
And I think that's, I will leave it with this. I think that is one pitfall. Now, not to take away with what you said, but you actually made me think of one thing. One pitfall too is people focus on the tools. I need this vendor, I need that vendor. They focus on features and functionality, and they don't have the right mindset in place.
Couldn't agree more.
Cool.
I mean, those things are important.
Yeah.
But they're secondary or tertiary. They shouldn't be leading the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Cool.
Cool.
So we will wrap up there for this week. Yeah, definitely a fun conversation, and we will talk to everyone later.
See you.